Well, you know, one of the things that's involved in this process, especially if you're really interested in this awakening situation, there seems to be, although there is no specific detailed process that people go through for this awakening to occur, there does seem to be things that are consistently there, you know, for people who have the awakening. And one of those things is the degree to which they're committed to this. Yeah, because you see, it stands to reason that if it is the case that you're already what you are, then the degree to which you're committed to experiencing being that would have you be paying a lot more attention more consistently, right, to the experience that's available to you all the time of your true nature. Yeah, and that's a good way to relate to this, you know, that another way to talk about this is to say, if you understand this conceptually, and you know what this is about, and you get the possibility, and you're, you know, and because of all that, you're really interested in this awakening experience, and you're really interested in this, the possibility of being liberated, meaning that you are a transcendental being. After the experience of awakening, you're a transcendental being. Meaning that, at that old saying, you're in the world but not of the world, you know, that you continue to operate in the form of a personality, but you know you're not one. You continue to experience the typical experiences of being a human being in terms of your emotional experience, in terms of the thought processes. But now your relationship to all that is one in which you're not identified with the mind, you're not identified with thinking, you're not identified with the emotions, at least not the way you were, and often not at all. So they still play, right? But the fact that you're not identified with them is now that's what's happening. It becomes that's what's happening instead of what's happening to me. It becomes this is what's happening right now instead of this is what I am thinking. Thoughts are happening. Emotions are happening. I am not feeling. I am not thinking. Emotions are happening. Thoughts are happening. So when it starts to break up so that you can be present in such a way where there's no resistance, where you're not struggling, where you're not in conflict anymore, where you're not trying to be different than you are anymore. And when emotions come up, you now have a natural sense of appreciation and understanding for those emotions in terms of if they come up, they're obviously asking to be experienced. That's the way emotions look from an awake perspective. If an emotion comes up, it's there. It's there, right? So now, so then the question is, how are you going to relate to it? In the unenlightened way, in the awake way of relating to it, is you identify with it, right? The thoughts that arise are my thoughts. The feelings that come up are my feelings, and what's causing them is out here in the world, right? And if those thoughts and feelings are negative or threatening, then I have to deal with something out here in the world, right? I have to fight or flight out here in the world. In an awake perspective, that's no longer the case. Now, if thoughts arise or emotions arise, the thoughts are given attention to determine their content. This happens very quickly. It's not like a long drawn out process, right? You begin to recognize the content of the thought, and when the content of the thought is not useful, when it's reactive, right? When it is not realistic, right? Then you realize, why am I giving attention to that? Why am I interested in that? It doesn't serve a purpose. It's suffering. It's causing suffering, right? This is the recognition that you have, out of which when thoughts arise and the content of those thoughts is like that, you don't stick around. you move your attention to something that's alive, something real, something useful, something practical. The breath, anything in the environment that's real and practical, right? So this is the shift, and the thing about it is this. I was thinking about this, and because I'm trying to decipher when I look at my own experience, I'm trying to decipher what was different, what happened that was different. And when I look back, because I had been a student of these teachings for a long time, I started studying this stuff when I wasn't even 20 years old, and I had been reading Alan Watts, and I had been going to an ashram and hanging out with these Kundalini yoga people, and did the S training and took LSD. I mean, I was out there, dealing with all this very early on. So the concepts for me, and I'm intelligent enough that I could grasp the concepts, just like you. Most of you grasp most of the concepts. If you don't, and we elaborate a little, you get it, right? They're not that hard to get, right? And then what happens as you deepen your understanding and you grasp the concepts, right? If your behavior and if your experience of yourself in relationship to other people and if your experience of yourself in relationship to life is still pretty much the same, you know what I mean? That you're still anxious, you still get into arguments with people, you still have negative thoughts about yourself that make you crazy, and you still feel depressed sometimes, and you're struggling and life is hard, you're under the weight of it all, If you have studied these teachings and concepts and you understand them, and yet that's the way it is for you, right? Then the understanding you have did not result in an awakening yet. The understanding you have did not result in an awakening yet. As a matter of fact, when I look at my own experience, my frustration about that was helpful. To understand, to see the difference, to know, how can I know what I know and still behave this way? You see what I'm saying? How can I know what I know and still fall so easily into the trap, especially with things like anger, right? So that the patterns that would come up to play out because of my conditioning and my experiences as a child and all that, we're still pretty much running the show. So that was not only frustrating, but disheartening. It's like, what's it going to take? You know what I mean? What's it going to take? I mean, I've done work. I went to therapy. I did body work. I did the S training. I took LSD. I took psilocybin. I hung out at ashrams. I did yoga. I practiced meditation. You know what I mean? So I was doing all the right stuff. It seemed so. I was doing all the right stuff, right? But it was still the same. I was still living in the world of my thought process. I was still living in the world of my emotional reactions. And I was still dealing with people like, you're the source of my upsets. You're causing me to suffer, right? And if you stopped, I'd be fine, right? I told that to the first wife. She didn't get it. I told it to the second one. She didn't get it either. I told it to the third one. And she didn't get it, right? And I'm too old with the fourth one to argue. But not only that, but finally I did get it. I did experience awakening. And so, and that's an interesting thing, because that whole thing, one of the places in your life that you can really look and see clearly where you're at is in your relationship to the people you're closest to. That might mean your parents, if they're still alive. It might mean your kids. It might mean your partner. And ultimately, it might mean yourself too, because you're as hard on you as you are on everybody else when you're in this unawakened state, okay? So to pay attention to that can be very helpful and very useful if you're willing to get the feedback about it, right? And for me, what happened was, because here I was down the road after having been married to different people, tried out different people to see if it would work with them. And it took me a while to realize it had nothing to do with them. I could have been happy with any one of them, okay? Well, maybe not all. But I could have been happy, with most of them, most of the time, And then in my final marriage, the one I was in when this awakening occurred, the same kind of stuff went on. Do you know what I mean? And it was really frustrating and really disturbing to me. because the way it occurred to me is the way it occurs to most people ordinarily. Like, oh shit, I made the mistake again. What was I thinking? I married another one that wasn't the one, right? And that's the way it would occur, right? And it was very disturbing and very frustrating because at that point it was very clear that this was a pattern, right? Very clear that this was a pattern. And in the middle of that kind of despair, right? Because it is a sense of despair, you know, if you've been in and out of marriages and you've paid a lot of money out to legal fees and lawyers, you know, and you've gone through all that terrible experience, you know, going through a divorce is a horror show, right? It's a horror show, emotionally, financially, the whole 9 yards, okay? So when I was in the marriage that I'm in now, and that pattern started to play, and I could see it playing, but I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop it. And it got to the point where I was desperate. I was still stuck in behaving like an asshole. I was still stuck in behaving in a reactive way, you know, and arguing and, you know, and all that. And this current, and the woman I'm married to now is a psychologist, so I really unwittingly set myself up, you know, because I had somebody that could analyze me and play games with me as much as I could with them. So that wasn't going to work, right? And it really got to the point where it was like, okay, I'm either going to have to run this pattern again and get another divorce and try again, but I'm too old for that. You know, I can't. What dating site do I go on? You know, the Relic antique site, at the Relic dating site or something, or the Almost Dead dating site.
Wait a minute, I'm older than you. So.
I'm not talking about you.
Wow. Vintage partners.
Vintage partners, right? So it seemed like a pretty desperate situation, right? And it's often the case when things get bad enough and you're aware of this possibility, right? It's often the case that that's when a breakthrough happens, right? That's what happened with Eckhart Tolle. That's what happened with Adyashanti. You know, that's what happened with Ramana Maharshi. And in a sense, that's what happened to me, because I actually woke up, and I mentioned this before, I actually woke up in the middle of an argument. I woke up in the middle of a fight, you know? And I was doing what I always did in that fight, winning. That was the only thing I allowed to happen. And I woke up.
You're always right.
Well, of course, that's what winning is all about, isn't it? Yeah. But I was very I was very concerned and very despondent and very, you know, upset and disturbed about all this. Not to mention the fact that I'm a psychologist. You know what I mean? Like my job is to help people not be like me. So, in the middle of the whole thing, there was an awakening, and I really want to emphasize that this awakening thing is not just an understanding. You know what I mean? Please don't allow yourself to fall into the trap of thinking because you understand these teachings that that's enough, that means you're awake. No. What you want to pay attention to is, how are you being in your life? That's where you can find out. How are you being in your life? Are you still pissed off a lot? Are you depressed? Are you anxious? Are you annoyed? Are you struggling with things all the time, right? Are you impatient? Are you intolerant, right? Are you unhappy, right? If all that's playing for you, right, then you haven't experienced the awakening. Once you experience the awakening, it's different. You know, it's different. The same stuff, because when you experience the awakening, the same stuff goes on. The same thoughts go, you know what I mean? Your brain didn't change, your mind didn't change, your conditioning isn't different, right? So after the awakening, the same stuff goes on. But when it's playing now, the relationship with it is not one in which it's that's me anymore, that's me thinking that, or that's me feeling that. No. Now the way it occurs is that's happening, but I am not in it, I am seeing it. I'm not being that way, I'm watching that in terms of what's going on as far as thoughts and emotions are concerned. And because of that, my behavior is no longer coming from the reaction. My behavior is no longer coming from the thoughts or the reaction. My behavior is coming from an experience of the truth of what's happening. That's what awake is. Awake means you're seeing what's really happening. You're not identified and stuck in your position about it. No, you're seeing what's really happening and if you're seeing what's really happening, you no longer are involved the way you were when you thought it was happening to you. So the same material can run, but now instead of it being me, instead of my identifying with it, it runs and it's just running and I'm watching it run, right? But I don't act it out. I'm able to just see it for what it is and stay calm, right? That's different. That's very different, right? So I'm emphasizing that because, first of all, I think it's important if you're here and you're interested in this, right? It's important for you to be interested in having the awakening experience. So in that last retreat that people did, he would say, you're either here because you're interested in the awakening experience and you've learned enough about it to know what's possible and to know it's real and to know it can happen to you. You can have this, right, in your life. And it may not have happened for you yet. And so the way you're here is to look and listen to, what could you practice? What could you understand that might move you toward that experience of having the awakening? Or you could be here and it's obvious you've had the awakening. If I interview your wife, she'll agree that you did have the awakening. That's a better person to ask than you. Right? If I interview the people around you and ask them how you are, they could probably give better feedback than you could. Although if you are awake and you've had the awakening experience, you could too. You could really describe. And you saw people at the retreat when he interacted with certain people. They would describe things to him, and he would ask him questions to try and get a better understanding of whether they really were awake, so he knew what to say next to him. So this awakening thing is important, and if you haven't had the experience yet, then you want to relate to the possibility of it with an intention to have it, with a commitment to have it, right? And with a willingness to watch in real time what's going on that's in the way. Because don't forget, it's already true. That's the thing. That's the thing that I think can make a big difference if you really apply it. It's already true. It's already true. Therefore, any thoughts you have that say it's not, you have to be paying attention to know that those thoughts aren't the truth, that those thoughts are distortions. And if they get your attention and you listen to them and you follow them and you believe them, right? You've believed yourself into staying asleep. That's what you've done. You've believed yourself into staying asleep. Well, the thoughts persisting aren't a problem. For you to relate to them like they're my thoughts, that's the problem. And when I listen to you speak, that's what I'm hearing. You literally say, I think, I keep thinking. Right. Yeah. Well, if you think and you keep thinking, right, that's the process of being asleep. That's the process of identifying with the thinking. I keep thinking, right? So if you want to get out of that, you have to allow yourself to witness and notice and recognize that while you're thinking, while you keep thinking, right, there's an awareness there. Yes? There's an awareness there, okay, right? So while you're busy thinking, that awareness that's there is the experience you're missing. Because and because in your case, see, and I can understand it for you because you're such a control freak, right? A control freak has to think a lot, right? Because they have to think about everything and make sure that it's a certain way, right? So that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of thinking, right? So you identify yourself as a thinker, and you believe in yourself as a thinker, and you believe that it's necessary for you to be the thinker and think the thoughts you think in order to be in control. Yeah. So it's not so easy for you to give that up because you've invested in it, you've made that how you're going to live, right? So the idea of stopping having that be you and how you're going to live, right, would be threatening, right? Because if I stop doing that, right, because these aren't
going to be right.
They're not going to be right. See, and they weren't right in the beginning. That's why you got in control. it is really hard to live the life of a person,
I know.
especially in relationship to other people, right? Because when they're not the way they should be, you get upset, right? And then you have to put up with them, or you have to straighten them out, right? And they don't like being straightened out, right? And so then you don't do that because you don't want to fight all the time, and so now you harbor your resentment, right? This is the craziness.
Grapes that were on sale.
See, but this is the thing. What I'm suggesting to you is really allow yourself to pay attention to what you just described, and be upset about it. Be more upset than you've ever been about it, because you're not willing to live like this. You don't. So have a crisis. I highly recommend it. No, I do. I highly recommend have a crisis. Bring it to a head, right? And I recommend this to all of you, right? Think about your own craziness. Think about the way you think. Think about your reactions. Think about the way you behave when you're reacting, right? Think about the way you think and how that thought process is causing you suffering and causing you misery. Think about that, right? No, really think about that. Really get into it and realize that unless this stops, if you had the guts, you'd probably kill yourself. Right?
We'll never be happy.
That's right. That's what I'm pointing to. Unless this stops, the rest of your life is going to be miserable and worse, much worse than it is now, unless this stops. And what I'm saying is face all that at once. Face it all at once. Have a crisis. Get really upset about it, right? And by doing that, you may build up enough pressure for the house of cards to fall. By doing that, you may build up enough pressure that, it's like Aji Shanti. Talk about pressure. This is an example of what I'm talking about. It's a little different, but not really different. Aji Shanti had a dog that he loved, right? And my dog just died, so I could really relate to this, right? And people a lot of times get closer to their dog than they do to anybody else, because the dog ain't going to hurt you, unless you really make it bite you or something. But dogs usually, you feed it, it's going to love you, right? So he had a dog, and he had the dog for, from a puppy until it was old, and then it died. And he was really suffering. He was really grieving, and I can relate to that, because when my dog died, I was really grieving. It was very strong grief, right? And so he was grieving, and he was grieving, and he was grieving, and it was getting worse, right, and worse the more he thought about it. And I could really get that, right, because the more you think about it, and I put my dog down, so that's a worse thing in terms of having to be there and know you've controlled the fact that he's dying, right? And then you think about all the things you did with him and how much you love him, and you can remember touching his body and the whole 9 yards, you know what I mean? It's grief is a very intense experience, when you really let yourself do it, when you really let the grief happen, right? Yeah. And what he reported is that after he was going through this grief, and it was heavier and heavier and heavier, and he was crying, and then all of a sudden, he started to laugh. He actually got to the other side of the experience of the grief, right? And on the other side of the experience of the grief was relief, right? So it just goes to show that when you're present to your emotions, when you're present to what's happening, it passes. It passes. The reality of impermanence is spoken of in Buddhism as kind of a description of the nature of suffering. Why are we suffering? Because nothing ever stays the same. Why are we suffering? Because we can't control anything. Everything's changing all the time. There's nothing we can... that's presented in Buddhism a lot of times as an example of suffering, that impermanence is why we're suffering, right? At the same time, there's another side to that coin. You could actually recognize that impermanence can be a good thing. The fact that things don't last can be a good thing, if it's a toothache, right? The fact that things don't last can be a good thing in terms of that after they get to a certain point, they can become a problem. Like with my dog, he had an enlarged heart, he had epilepsy, he was failing, his joints were failing, he wouldn't even take the medication anymore. He stopped eating, okay? So For impermanence to apply there was a good thing. It was time to let him go, okay? So this whole idea of impermanence it's for most people it's suffering because they're fixated on controlling everything, right? But once you wake up and you see the way things really are and you let go, you let everything come and go the way it's coming and going, then it's not a problem anymore. Nothing will bother you, nothing will stay and keep torturing you to the degree to which you just let it go, the degree to which you just allow the experience to be what it is. If there's an emotion, feel it. You know, that's so obvious and simple that you would think that it would be a no-brainer, right? But people resist their emotions, don't they? I don't like it. Only emotion I want to feel is happiness and pleasure. And, you know, anything on the upside, anything that's good, I like, I'll take it. The rest of it, I don't want it, I don't want to feel it, I don't like it, and when it happens, I resist it, you know, I resist it. I tighten up against it, right? I don't want that, I don't like it. Even certain thoughts, right? Thoughts and feelings. Even certain images, right? Images of things that happened in the past that I don't want to remember, okay? That's resistance. That's resistance. When you wake up and you see the truth and you see who you are, there's no need to resist anything anymore. You can be the way you are, and the way you are is the way awareness is, right? It never resists anything. It's like the space in this room. It allows everything to be just the way it is all the time. All the time. So if you complete the process and you're truly liberated, right? Everything will continue to happen. The personality will continue to exist and play. Stuff will continue to run in your brain and in your mind. It'll probably lessen a lot, you know, because you're letting go, you know, you're losing interest in anything that comes up that's not realistic, right? But life goes on, right? The difference is you're letting life go on. You're not deciding about it in terms of is it the way it should be anymore. You're clear that it's always the way it is. It's never the way it should be. It's always the way it is. It's never the way you think it should be, right? Or the thoughts tell you it should be. When that's clear experientially, right? Then you kind of just know better. It's kind of like you know how to ride the bike now. It's kind of like you know how to ride the bike now. Until you learn balance, right? When you were learning to ride a bike, you would pedal a little bit and then lose your balance and put your foot down, right? Pedal a little bit, lose your balance and put your foot down, right? But then at some point you kind of got what balance is, and then you didn't have to put your foot down anymore. You could ride the bike. The same thing is true here. The bike is life, right? The bike is life. That once you get clear about who you are and about the way it is, and you're awake to that, you're present to that, right? Then even though you may falter, right? Even though you may still wobble for a while, right? At some point, you'll get clear enough about how to stay awake and stay present consistently that it's like riding the bike and discovering balance. Yeah, and then as you go through life, you're witnessing it all, you know? I heard a person who, where was it? Today I was reading something about a monk that went on a 100-day retreat. And after the retreat, he met with his teacher, a Zen master. And the Zen master, you know, wanted to check him out. You know, where are you now after this 100-day retreat, right? And so they had an interaction back and forth. And what the monk said as kind of a bottom line to the master, he said, it's like TV. It's like TV. And the master said, soon you will be teaching. And what did he mean when he said it's like TV, right? It's like that. It's like you're watching TV instead of that you're in the middle of a life that you're terrified of and that you're struggling to control. You're just watching TV. That's why watching TV is so popular, because, you know, people wish that's the way they could experience their life, like they're just watching TV, right? So you're not upset all the time about what's going on. So, questions?
What channel?
Your channel.
Watch my show.
Take it easy, Robert. All right, see you all later.